The sound of gunfire cracked through the stillness of the Montana morning as Abigail Andrews leaped from her bed, her heart pounding against her ribs. Not raiders again, not today, of all days. She had a stagecoach to catch. Throwing open the shutters of her small bedroom window, she squinted into the golden dawn, relief washing over her when she realized it was only Quinn Wallace and his ranch hands practicing their shooting at the far edge of his property that bordered her small homestead. Abigail Abbey, to most everyone, had come to Whispering Creek 3 years ago in 1879, a 22-year-old Eastern girl with dreams of independence and a teaching certificate clutched in her trembling hands. The town had welcomed her warmly enough, especially since they'd been without a teacher for nearly a year. But now, after 3 long years of building something out of nothing, she was preparing to return east, summoned by a telegram informing her of her ailing father's deteriorating health. She moved to her washstand, splashing cool water on her face while mentally reviewing her departure plans. The stagecoach would arrive at noon, and she had already packed her trunks. Her small cabin and teaching position would be taken over by the new schoolmarm arriving next week. Everything was arranged, everything except saying goodbye to the Wallace twins. Those two 7-year-old whirlwinds had captured her heart from the first day they'd tumbled into her schoolhouse, all freckles and mischief. Their father, Quinn Wallace, had brought them to town after their mother died giving birth to them, determined to raise them properly despite being a young widower managing one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory. Quinn. Abigail felt the familiar flutter in her stomach at the thought of him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a quiet strength that commanded respect without a single word. He'd kept a respectful distance from her these past years, but there had been moments a lingering glance across the church pews, the way his hand brushed hers when passing the collection plate. How he always seemed to find a reason to escort her home after community gatherings that made her wonder what might have been under different circumstances. But circumstances were what they were. Her father needed her, and she had given her word she would return. Abigail shook the thoughts away and dressed quickly in her traveling clothes, a practical navy blue skirt, white blouse, and her sensible walking boots. The last item was her treasured wide-brimmed straw hat, adorned with a simple blue ribbon that matched her eyes. It had been her mother's once, and it was the only truly fashionable thing she owned in this rugged territory. A knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found herself face to face with Emma and Ellie Wallace, their matching braids slightly askew and identical grins lighting up their freckled faces. "Miss Andrews, Pa said we could come see you before you go," Emma announced, pushing past Abigail into the cabin. "We brought you something," Ellie added, more reserved than her sister but no less enthusiastic as she revealed a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Why, how thoughtful." Abigail smiled, ushering them both inside. "I was hoping to see you before I left." "We don't want you to leave," Emma declared, plopping herself down on Abigail's bed, heedless of the carefully folded clothing. "Pa doesn't want you to leave either," Ellie added, watching Abigail's face carefully. "He gets all quiet when people talk about the new teacher coming." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your father is just concerned about your education," she said, carefully unwrapping their gift. Inside was a small leather-bound journal with her initials burned into the cover. "Pa helped us make it," Emma said proudly. "So you can write about your adventures and not forget us?" "As if I could ever forget either of you," Abigail said, her throat suddenly tight. "This is beautiful. Thank you both." She placed the journal in her handbag, then glanced at the small clock on her mantel. "I need to finish packing, girls. The stage will be here in just a couple of hours." The twins exchanged a look that Abigail had come to recognize as trouble brewing. "What are you two planning?" she asked, hands on her hips. "Nothing," they chimed in unison, the picture of innocence. Abigail replied, unconvinced. Well, help me pack these last few things and then we'll walk into town together. As Abigail moved around the cabin gathering her final belongings, she didn't notice Emma whispering in Ellie's ear, nor did she see Ellie slip her precious hat from the peg by the door and hide it behind her back. An hour later, with her trunk strapped to the back of her small wagon, Abigail was ready to drive into town. The twins had been suspiciously helpful, even offering to check that she hadn't forgotten anything in the cabin's single room. "All right, girls, time to go," she announced, reaching for her hat. Her hand met empty air. "That's strange. I'm sure I put my hat right here." The twins giggled, backing toward the door. "Emma? Ellie? Do you know where my hat is?" Abigail asked, suspicion growing. "Maybe," Emma said, grinning. "Maybe not," Ellie added. "Girls, this isn't funny. I need my hat for traveling," Abigail said, searching the small cabin. "Why do you have to go, Miss Andrews?" Emma asked, suddenly serious. "We don't want a new teacher." "Your father needs someone to teach you, and my father needs me," Abigail explained, as she had multiple times before. "But Pa needs you too," Ellie blurted. Abigail paused in her search, her heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" "He's lonely," Emma said simply, "and he smiles more when you're around." "And he put on his good shirt today," Ellie added, "the one without any holes." Abigail didn't know how to respond to that. "Girls, please, where's my hat?" "We hid it," Emma admitted, "and we won't tell where until you promise to stay." "We can't let you go," Ellie added earnestly. "Now you gotta stay forever." Abigail sighed, about to scold them properly when a deep voice from the doorway interrupted. "Emma Jean and Eleanor May Wallace." The twins froze, then slowly turned to face their father, who filled the doorframe with his imposing presence. Quinn Wallace removed his own well-worn Stetson, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His face was weathered from years under the Montana sun, but his eyes were kind as they met Abigail's. "I apologize for my daughter's behavior, Miss Andrews," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl he'd brought with him from Texas years ago. "Girls, return Miss Andrews's hat this instant." "But Pa," Emma protested, "if she doesn't have a hat, she can't go. And if she can't go—" "Emma," Quinn's voice was gentle but firm, "that's not how we treat people we care about." The twins exchanged a defeated look, and Ellie disappeared behind the cabin, returning moments later with Abigail's straw hat, now slightly dusty. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, handing it over with genuine remorse in her eyes. "Me too," Emma added, though she looked more frustrated than sorry. Abigail accepted the hat, brushing it clean before placing it on her head. "Thank you for returning it," she said. "And while I appreciate that you want me to stay, I've made a promise I need to keep." Quinn studied her face, something unreadable in his expression. "Girls, wait in the wagon," he said after a moment. Once they had trudged outside, he stepped into the cabin, suddenly seeming too large for the small space. "I truly am sorry about that, Miss Andrews. I've spoken to them about your leaving, but they've grown mighty attached to you these past years." "As I have to them," Abigail admitted, adjusting her hat nervously. "They're wonderful girls, Mr. Wallace." "Quinn," he corrected, as he had countless times. "After 3 years, I think you might call me by my given name, especially since you're leaving us." There was something in the way he said "leaving us" that made Abigail's heart constrict. "Quinn," she conceded softly. He took a step closer. "I don't suppose there's anything that might convince you to return once your father is well?" Abigail looked up at him, surprised by the question. I hadn't considered it. My life in Boston." "Is it a life you miss?" he interrupted, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I miss certain conveniences," she admitted. "Indoor plumbing, libraries, theaters. But not enough to leave here willingly, he said, a statement rather than a question. Abigail felt as if the air between them had suddenly become charged with electricity. The girls mentioned you wore your good shirt today, she said, changing the subject as her cheeks warmed. Quinn glanced down at himself, a slight flush creeping up his neck. They notice everything, those two. They said you're lonely, she continued, emboldened by the knowledge that she was leaving, that this might be her only chance to speak freely. Did they now? He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to recognize as discomfort. Well, raising twins alone isn't exactly how I pictured my life unfolding. You've done a remarkable job with them, Abigail said sincerely. Thank you, he replied, then hesitated before adding, but they're not wrong, Abigail. I am lonely, have been for some time. The use of her given name sent a shiver through her. In 3 years, he'd never once called her Abigail. I should go, she said, suddenly needing air. The stage doesn't leave for another hour, he finished for her. Abigail, I've respected your position in this community. A schoolteacher needs to maintain a certain reputation, and a widowed rancher with 2 wild daughters isn't exactly what the town would consider a suitable match. Quinn, please, let me finish, he said, taking another step closer. I've watched you these past 3 years. Seen how you've not only taught our children their letters and numbers, but how you've become a part of this community. How you've cared for the sick when Doc Harrison was overwhelmed during the fever last winter. How you organized the Harvest Festival and made Christmas special for every child, not just those from families who could afford presents. Abigail stood speechless, her heart hammering against her ribs. I've watched and I've waited, thinking there would be time, Quinn continued, his voice deepening with emotion. And now you're leaving, and my girls are hiding your hat because they love you, and I find I can't let you go without at least telling you that I... He stopped, swallowing hard. That you what? Abigail whispered, barely daring to breathe. That I love you, Quinn said simply. And that if you returned after seeing to your father, there would be a place for you here. Not just as our teacher, but as... He broke off again, color rising to his face. As what? She pressed, her voice trembling. As my wife, he said. If you'd have me. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and irrevocable. Quinn, Abigail began, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea you felt that way. I know, he said with a rueful smile. I'm not much for words, Abigail, but I'm asking you to think on it while you're gone, to consider coming back to us, to me. Before she could respond, Emma's voice called from outside. Pa, the stage is coming early. We can hear it. Quinn stepped back, replacing his hat. I'll leave you to your preparations, he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. The girls and I will escort you to town. Abigail nodded, unable to form words as her mind reeled from his declaration. As he turned to leave, she reached out impulsively, catching his arm. Quinn. He stopped, looking back at her with hope so naked in his expression that it nearly broke her heart. I'll think on it, she promised, and I'll write to the girls. And to me? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. And to you, she agreed softly. He nodded once, then left the cabin, leaving Abigail to gather the shattered pieces of her composure. Outside, she could hear him speaking to the twins, his deep voice a soothing rumble she couldn't quite make out. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat gradually slow. Quinn Wallace loved her. Had loved her, apparently, for some time. The knowledge was both exhilarating and terrifying. Abigail had come west seeking independence, determined to make her own way in the world without relying on a man's protection or provision. She had succeeded, building a life and reputation of her own in Whispering Creek. The thought of giving that up, of becoming Mrs. Wallace, would have seemed like a step backward 3 years ago. But now she wasn't so sure. There was a difference, she realized, between needing a man and choosing one. And Quinn wasn't asking her to give up teaching, in fact. He seemed to admire her for it. The distant sound of the stagecoach's approach broke into her thoughts. Gathering her handbag and giving one last look around the cabin that had been her home, Abigail stepped outside into the bright Montana sunlight. Quinn stood by his wagon, tall and steady as always, while the twins fidgeted beside him. When he saw her, something in his expression softened, and Abigail felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I'll ever be," she replied, allowing him to help her up onto the seat of her small wagon. As they set off toward town, the twins riding in the back of Quinn's wagon while he drove alongside Abigail, she found herself studying his profile, seeing him with new eyes. The strong jawline, the laugh lines around his eyes, the way he handled the reins with confident ease, all things she had noticed before, but never allowed herself to truly appreciate. "You're staring, Miss Andrews," he said without looking at her, though a small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Just memorizing," she replied honestly. In case you decide not to come back," he finished for her, his smile fading. "In case it's a long time before I see you again," she corrected gently. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, the sound of the twins' chatter and the horses' hooves filling the air between them. As they approached the town, Abigail could see the stagecoach already waiting at the depot, the driver loading mail sacks while a couple of passengers stretched their legs. Quinn helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The twins immediately attached themselves to her skirts, their earlier mischief forgotten in the face of the reality of her departure. "You will come back, won't you, Miss Andrews?" Ellie asked, her eyes wide and earnest. "Please say you will," Emma added, gripping Abigail's hand tightly. Abigail knelt down to their level, gathering both girls close. "I have to take care of my father first," she said carefully, "but I promise to write to you both and to think very seriously about coming back." "Promise?" Emma pressed. "I promise to think about it," Abigail repeated. "That's the best I can do right now." The girls seemed to accept this, though reluctantly. Quinn stepped forward to help the stagecoach driver load Abigail's trunk, leaving her alone with the twins for a moment. "Your father is a good man," she told them softly, "one of the best I've ever known." "Does that mean you'll marry him?" Emma asked bluntly. Abigail gasped. "Emma, we heard him talking to Uncle Jasper last week," Ellie explained. "He said he was thinking of asking you before you left, but he was scared." "Pa's not scared of anything," Emma insisted. "Except maybe losing you." Abigail didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You two are too clever for your own good," she finally managed. "So will you," Ellie persisted. "That's between your father and me," Abigail said firmly. "Now, be good girls while I'm gone, and mind your new teacher." "She won't be as pretty as you," Emma said loyally. "Or as smart," Ellie added. "Or as—" "Last call for the eastbound stage," the driver interrupted, climbing up to his seat. Quinn returned to Abigail's side, his face a careful mask. "Your trunk is loaded," he said, "and I've asked the driver to take special care with it." "Thank you," Abigail replied, suddenly finding it hard to meet his eyes. "Girls, say your goodbyes," Quinn instructed, his voice gentle but firm. Emma and Ellie each gave Abigail a fierce hug, then reluctantly stepped back to their father's side. Quinn reached out, adjusting Abigail's hat where it had been knocked slightly askew by the twins' enthusiastic embraces. "Safe travels, Abigail," he said, his fingers lingering near her cheek. "Remember what I said." "I will," she promised, her voice barely audible. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, right there in front of the whole town. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand, then helped her up into the stagecoach. As the driver cracked his whip and the horses lurched forward, Abigail leaned out the window for one last look. Quinn stood tall and straight, his hat in his hands and his daughters on either side of him, all three watching as the coach pulled away. "Now you gotta stay forever," Emma had said, and as the distance between them grew, Abigail wondered if perhaps the child hadn't been wiser than she knew. The journey east was long and uncomfortable, with each passing mile taking her further from Whispering Creek and from Quinn. The stagecoach gave way to a train, and finally, after nearly 2 weeks of travel, Abigail arrived in Boston to find her childhood home much changed. Her father, once robust and commanding, had withered to a shadow of his former self. The heart condition that had plagued him for years had finally gained the upper hand, leaving him weak and bedridden. Abigail immediately took charge of his care, dismissing the incompetent nurse her brother had hired and establishing a routine that seemed to bring her father some comfort. "You've changed, Abby," her father observed one evening as she read to him from the newspaper. "There's a strength in you that wasn't there before." "Montana does that to a person," she replied with a small smile. "You either become stronger or you leave." "And yet here you are," he pointed out, his voice raspy but his mind still sharp. Abigail set down the newspaper. "You needed me." "I did," he agreed, "but I wonder if someone else needs you more." She looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" Her father gestured to the small stack of letters on his bedside table. "You've received 3 letters from those Wallace twins in the month you've been here, and one from their father that you read at least twice, judging by how worn the paper is already." Abigail felt her cheeks grow warm. "The twins are my students." "And their father?" "Is—" She hesitated. "A friend." Her father's knowing look told her he wasn't fooled. "A friend who writes 4-page letters and signs them, 'Yours always'?" "You read my letter?" Abigail exclaimed, embarrassed. "No." Her father chuckled weakly. "But you left it open on the table and I couldn't help seeing the signature." He reached for her hand. "Abby, I'm an old man, and I'm not getting any better." "Don't say that," she protested. "It's the truth," he said firmly. "And I didn't call you back here to watch me die, or to trap you in a life you've outgrown." "I'm not trapped," she insisted. "I'm where I need to be." "For now," he agreed. "But not forever." He nodded toward the letters. "Tell me about him. This Quinn Wallace who writes to you of Montana sunsets and wildflowers that remind him of your eyes." Abigail hesitated, then found herself telling her father everything about Quinn and the twins, about the little community of Whispering Creek, about the life she had built there, and the proposal that had come just as she was leaving. Her father listened without interruption, a small smile playing at his lips. When she finished, he sighed contentedly. "He sounds like a good man." "He is," Abigail confirmed. "And you love him," her father stated. Abigail opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. "I think perhaps I do," she admitted quietly, the realization washing over her with surprising clarity. "But my life is here now, with you." "No," her father said, with more strength than he had shown in days. "Your life is where your heart is, Abby, and I don't think you left your heart in Boston." Before she could respond, a coughing fit overtook him, and Abigail rushed to help him sip water and catch his breath. The conversation ended there, but his words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she went about her duties in the days that followed. Each letter from Quinn revealed more of the man she had known for 3 years but never truly seen. He wrote of his daily life, of the ranch and the twins' antics, but also of deeper things: his hopes for his daughters' futures, his dreams for the land he worked. his memories of his late wife and the guilt he had carried for years, feeling as though loving Abigail somehow dishonored her memory. "I realize now," he wrote in his fourth letter, "that Catherine would have wanted me to find happiness again. She loved life too much to expect me to live the rest of mine alone. And the girls need a mother's love not to replace hers, but to add to it, to help them grow into the women she would have wanted them to become." Abigail read and reread his letters until she knew passages by heart. She wrote back as often as she could, sharing stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's condition, and her growing realization that the city no longer felt like home. "The streets seem too narrow now," she wrote to Quinn, "the buildings too tall and too close together. I find myself longing for open skies and distant mountains, for the scent of sage after rain and the sound of wind through the pines. Is it possible to become homesick for a place that wasn't always your home?" 2 months after her arrival in Boston, her father took a turn for the worse. Pneumonia set in, and despite the doctor's efforts, it became clear that the end was near. Abigail sat by his bedside day and night, reading to him when he was awake and holding his hand when he slept. On what would be his last night, he woke suddenly from a light doze, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Abby," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "I need you to make me a promise." "Anything," she said, leaning close. "When I'm gone, promise me you'll go back to Montana, to your Wallace family." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "They're not my family yet." "But they will be," he said with certainty. "Promise me, Abby. I don't want to die knowing you'll stay here out of some misplaced sense of duty." "I promise," she whispered, pressing his thin hand to her cheek. "I'll go back." He smiled, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. By morning he was gone, slipping away so quietly that Abigail, dozing in the chair beside him, didn't realize until she woke and found his hand cold in hers. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, legal matters, and sorting through a lifetime of possessions. Her brother, who had moved to New York years earlier, returned briefly for the funeral, but was eager to get back to his business. He seemed relieved when Abigail expressed no interest in keeping the family home, agreeing readily to her suggestion that it be sold and the proceeds divided between them. "You're really going back to that wilderness?" he asked incredulously when she told him of her plans. "It's not a wilderness to me anymore," she replied. "It's home." With her affairs in order and her father's estate settled, Abigail found herself once again on a train heading west, though this time with a lighter heart despite her grief. She had telegraphed Quinn from Chicago, letting him know when to expect the stage to arrive in Whispering Creek. What she hadn't expected was the welcome that awaited her when the stagecoach finally pulled into the small town after the long, dusty journey. It seemed the entire community had turned out, lining the single main street with smiling faces. A banner hung across the street reading, "Welcome home, Miss Andrews." But it was the three figures standing directly in front of the stage depot that brought tears to her eyes. Quinn, handsome in a clean black suit that must have been ordered specially from the mercantile, stood tall with his hat in his hands. Beside him, Emma and Ellie were practically vibrating with excitement, each holding a bouquet of wildflowers. As the coach came to a stop, Quinn stepped forward to open the door. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with such hope and love that Abigail felt her breath catch. "Welcome home, Abigail," he said softly, offering his hand to help her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, the twins launched themselves at her, nearly bowling her over with their enthusiastic hugs. "You came back! You really came back!" Emma cried, wrapping her arms around Abigail's waist. "We knew you would," Ellie added, more reserved but no less joyful. "Pa said you promised." "And I keep my promises," Abigail said, kneeling to embrace them properly. The girls presented their wildflower bouquets with great ceremony, then stepped back as Quinn approached. The crowd around them had fallen silent, watching with undisguised interest. "Abigail," Quinn began, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes. "I know you've only just returned, and you might need time to settle in." "Quinn," she interrupted gently, "I've had 4 months to think about what you asked me. I don't need any more time." A hush fell over the watching townspeople, and even the twins seemed to hold their breath. "And?" Quinn asked, hope and fear warring in his expression. In answer, Abigail stepped forward and, with the boldness that Montana had taught her, placed her hand on his cheek. "Yes," she said simply. "My answer is yes." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Quinn wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that left no doubt about his feelings. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and the twins danced around them, shouting, "She said yes! She said yes!" When he finally set her down, Quinn cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her eyes. "This life isn't easy, and I know you had a different one back east." "This is the life I choose," Abigail said firmly. "With you and the girls. This is home now." Quinn's smile was blinding as he leaned down to kiss her, right there in front of the entire town. Abigail heard the twins giggling and the townspeople whistling, but all that mattered was Quinn's arms around her and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church at the edge of town. The entire community turned out for the celebration, which spilled from the church into the street and continued well into the evening. Emma and Ellie served as their flower girls, solemnly walking ahead of Abigail as she made her way down the aisle to where Quinn waited, looking both terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached him, his eyes taking in the simple white dress she had sewn herself with help from the women of the town. "So do you," she replied with a smile, admiring the way his new suit emphasized his broad shoulders. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt, with Reverend Thompson speaking of love's endurance and the blessings of family. When it came time for their vows, Quinn's voice never wavered as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. Abigail, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes, made the same promise in return. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared with a broad smile. "Quinn, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience, though the look Quinn gave her afterward promised much more once they were alone. The reception that followed was a true Western celebration, with trestle tables laden with food, a makeshift dance floor in the street, and enough whiskey flowing to ensure everyone's good spirits. Quinn and Abigail moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends and neighbors. "Mrs. Wallace," Quinn murmured in her ear as they shared their first dance, "how does it feel?" "Wonderful," Abigail replied honestly, "though I do have one request." "Anything," he promised immediately. "I'd like to continue teaching," she said. "At least until the twins are older. Miss Peterson has done an admirable job in my absence, but she's already mentioned wanting to return east next year." Quinn chuckled. "I thought you might say that. I already spoke to the school board. They're happy to have you back whenever you're ready." "You're an extraordinary man, Quinn Wallace," Abigail said, leaning up to press a quick kiss to his jaw. "And you're an extraordinary woman," he returned. "One I'm grateful to call my wife." As the celebration continued around them, the twins appeared at their side, both looking uncharacteristically shy. "Does this mean we call you Ma now?" Emma asked, fidgeting with the ribbon on her dress. Abigail exchanged a glance with Quinn, then knelt down to the girl's level. "Only if you want to," she said carefully. "I know your mother will always be special to you, and I would never try to replace her. But you're our Ma now, too. Ellie reasoned. Pa said we could have two, one in heaven watching over us, and one here to help us grow up right. Abigail felt tears prick at her eyes. That's exactly right, she managed. And I would be honored if you called me Ma. Good, Emma said decisively. Because I already told everyone at school that my Ma is the prettiest and smartest in the whole territory. Quinn laughed, ruffling her hair. That she is, darlin', that she is. As the evening wore on, Quinn and Abigail slipped away from the celebration, climbing into the wagon he had decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. The twins would be staying with Quinn's foreman and his wife for a few days, while the newlyweds had some time to themselves at the ranch. Happy, Mrs. Wallace? Quinn asked as they drove through the gathering dusk, his arm around her shoulders. Happier than I ever thought possible, Abigail admitted, leaning into his solid warmth. The girls are over the moon, he said. They haven't stopped talking about having a mother again since you telegraphed you were coming back. And what about their father? Abigail asked, looking up at his profile. Is he happy too? Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his eyes were serious as they searched hers. Abigail, I never thought I'd find love again after Catherine died. I was content to raise the girls and run the ranch, and I thought that would be enough. He took her hand in his, bringing it to his lips. But then you came to town with your Eastern education and your kind heart, and suddenly, enough wasn't enough anymore. Quinn, she whispered, touched by his rare eloquence. I'm not just happy, he continued. I'm blessed beyond measure. You've given me and the girls a second chance at being a real family. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I love you, Abigail Wallace. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. I could never regret it, she assured him, leaning in to kiss him properly for the first time without the eyes of the town upon them. Not when saying yes has brought me home. The ranch house was lit with lanterns when they arrived, a welcoming glow in the darkness. Quinn helped Abigail down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her over the threshold. Welcome home, Mrs. Wallace, he said, setting her gently on her feet in the front room. Abigail looked around at the comfortable but decidedly masculine space, already seeing small changes she might make to soften it. But those thoughts were for another day. Tonight was about beginning their life together, about finally allowing the feelings they had both kept carefully controlled for so long. Quinn seemed to read her thoughts, his eyes darkening as he took her hand. Let me show you the rest of the house, he said, his voice deeper than usual. The tour was brief, ending at the master bedroom where someone likely Quinn's housekeeper, Mrs. Hernandez, had left a fire burning low in the fireplace and turned down the large bed with its handmade quilt. Abigail suddenly felt shy, aware that for all her 25 years, she knew little of what happened between a husband and wife. Quinn seemed to sense her nervousness, drawing her gently into his arms. We have all the time in the world, Abigail, he murmured against her hair. Nothing needs to happen that you're not ready for. His consideration only made her love him more. I'm not afraid, she assured him, looking up into his face. Just inexperienced. The slow smile that spread across his features made her heart beat faster. Then we'll learn together, he promised, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of patience, tenderness, and the promise of passion to come. That night, in the warm circle of her husband's arms, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were a period of adjustment for all of them. Abigail returned to teaching while also learning to run a ranch household, a challenge she tackled with characteristic determination. The twins tested boundaries, sometimes playing one parent against the other until Quinn and Abigail established a united front, And Quinn learned to balance his natural protectiveness with respect for Abigail's independence and capabilities. There were difficult days, of course. Days when the twins were especially willful, or when the demands of the ranch kept Quinn away from dawn until well after dusk. Days when Abigail found herself missing certain comforts of her Eastern life, or struggling with a task that every other ranch wife seemed to find simple. But there were far more good days. Days when the family worked together, each contributing their own strengths. Evenings spent around the dining table, sharing stories and laughter. Quiet moments when Quinn and Abigail sat on the porch after the twins were asleep, watching the stars and talking of everything and nothing. And there were exceptional days, like the morning almost a year into their marriage when Abigail woke with a certainty that their family was about to grow. Quinn's reaction to the news' speechless joy, followed by almost comical concern for her comfort, had her laughing and crying at once. A baby, he kept repeating, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The twins' reaction was equally enthusiastic, though tempered with practical questions. Where will the baby sleep? Ellie wanted to know. Can we teach it to ride? Was Emma's primary concern. Eventually, Quinn assured her with a laugh, but not right away. As Abigail's pregnancy progressed, the entire community rallied around them. Women from town and neighboring farms brought quilts and tiny clothes, while men offered to help Quinn with ranch work so he could spend more time at home. The school board arranged for Miss Peterson's younger sister to take over Abigail's teaching duties when the time came, ensuring her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. Quinn became increasingly protective, fretting over Abigail's health and insisting she rest more than she felt necessary. It was a source of gentle contention between them until the night she found him sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the darkness. Quinn, she called softly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. What are you doing out here? He turned to her, and even in the dim light she could see the worry etched in his face. Just thinking. Abigail settled into the chair beside him, her hand automatically going to the swell of her stomach where their child grew. About what? He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed heavily. About Catherine. About how she died. Understanding dawned. You're worried about me, Abigail said softly. About the birth. Terrified, he admitted, his voice rough. I can't lose you, Abigail. I can't go through that again. You won't, she promised, reaching for his hand. Catherine was alone when her time came, with only a midwife who had little experience with difficult births. I'll have Doc Harrison, and he's delivered hundreds of babies. But what if something goes wrong? Quinn persisted. What if... Quinn, she interrupted gently. We can't live in fear of what might happen. We can only prepare as best we can and trust that God has a plan for us. She guided his hand to her belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. This child is strong, like its father. And I'm strong too. Quinn's expression softened as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Stubborn, you mean? He said, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. That too, Abigail agreed, relieved to see the shadow lifting from his eyes. Now, are you coming to bed? Your son or daughter is making it very difficult for me to sleep alone. Quinn stood, helping her to her feet and pulling her close as her rounded belly would allow. I love you, Abigail Wallace, he said solemnly, more than I have words to say. I know, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. And I love you too, now and always. When Abigail's time finally came, it was a clear spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the prairie. Quinn sent one of the ranch hands racing for Doc Harrison while he helped Abigail to their bed, his face pale but his hands steady as he followed her instructions for preparing for the birth. The twins were sent to stay with neighbors, though they protested loudly, insisting they were old enough to help. Only Quinn's promise that they would be the first to meet their new brother or sister once everything was safe persuaded them to go. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the day and into the night. Quinn never left Abigail's side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement when her strength began to flag. Doc Harrison, experienced and unflappable, directed them both with calm authority, assuring Quinn repeatedly that everything was progressing normally. "You're doing wonderfully, Abigail," the doctor said as dawn approached. "I can see the head now. Just a few more pushes." Quinn held Abigail's hand, his face a mixture of awe and terror as he watched their child enter the world. The infant's first cry filled the room, strong and indignant, and Doc Harrison smiled broadly. "Congratulations," he said, placing the squalling, red-faced newborn on Abigail's chest. "You have a healthy son." Quinn's breath caught as he stared down at the tiny life they had created. "A son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Abigail, we have a son." Abigail looked up at him through tears of exhaustion and joy. "He's perfect," she said, running a gentle finger over the baby's downy head. "Just like his mother," Quinn agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They named him Samuel after Abigail's father, with Thomas as a middle name in honor of Quinn's father. The twins were brought home that afternoon, their initial disappointment at having a brother instead of a sister quickly forgotten as they peered in wonder at the tiny infant. "He's so small," Emma marveled, touching his minuscule fingers with uncharacteristic gentleness. "But he'll grow," Ellie said confidently, "and we'll teach him everything he needs to know." "I'm counting on that," Quinn told them, his arm around Abigail as she cradled their son. "Samuel is lucky to have such fine big sisters." As the girls carefully climbed onto the bed to sit beside Abigail, Quinn surveyed his family with a heart so full it seemed it might burst. His daughters, bright and curious, growing more beautiful each day. His wife, tired but radiant, stronger than she knew. And now his son, a new life full of possibilities. "Thank you," he said softly to Abigail when the girls were distracted by the baby's yawn. "For what?" she asked, looking up at him with a smile. "For coming to Whispering Creek," he replied, "for teaching our children, for loving me." He touched Samuel's cheek gently. "For giving me another chance at happiness." "I should be thanking you," Abigail countered. "If the twins hadn't hidden my hat that day, I might never have known how you felt. I might have gone back east and never returned." "Smartest thing those girls ever did," Quinn chuckled, "hiding that hat." "Now you gotta stay forever," Emma had said, and as Abigail looked around at the family she had found in this unlikely place, she knew the child had been right all along. 5 years later, on a bright summer day much like the one when she had first arrived in Whispering Creek, Abigail stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Quinn taught Samuel to ride his very first pony. The twins, now 12 and growing into beautiful young women, took turns leading the pony in circles around the yard, their patience with their little brother one of the many ways they showed their love. Beside Abigail, 2-year-old Catherine Rose Wallace Katie to everyone bounced in excitement, her dark curls bobbing as she clapped her hands for her brother. "Me next, Mama," she demanded, turning eyes the exact shade of Quinn's up to Abigail. "Me ride too." "When you're a little older, sweetheart," Abigail promised, lifting the toddler into her arms. "For now, you can watch Samuel." Across the yard, Quinn looked up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He said something to the twins, then crossed to the porch, bounding up the steps to plant a kiss on Katie's chubby cheek before drawing Abigail into a one-armed embrace. "Samuel's a natural," he announced proudly, "just like his sisters." "And his father," Abigail added, leaning into his solid warmth. Quinn's arm tightened around her. Happy? He asked, a question he still posed regularly even after all this time. Abigail looked out at the scene before her, her children, healthy and thriving, the ranch, prosperous and growing, the community that had welcomed her and now looked to her as one of its leaders. Then she looked up at the man beside her, whose love had given her a home and a family beyond anything she had dared to dream. Completely, she answered truthfully. Are you? Quinn's smile was all the answer she needed, but he gave her the words anyway, just as he had every day since she had returned to Whispering Creek and found her true home. More than I ever thought possible, he said, bending to kiss her as their children's laughter echoed around them. Now and forever.